there's a very sort of insidious codependence there that you have to chip away at. And we've been working at it in St. John's for years now, and it's still there. And we do great things each year, but we still have a lot of work to do. It's a real journey. And so I thank you for bringing up that point, because that's really important. I wanted to say something about homes, not care homes, but private homes, because I've been talking a lot about my recent background, which has been nursing homes. I used to be in private practice, but not since the early 90s. But I think there's this tendency to think, yeah, well, nursing homes, they have a problem. They over-medicate people. But we know that these medications are used in your own home as well. And if, you know, nursing homes take away your possessions and your privacy and all this stuff, well, then if you're home, you shouldn't be distressed because you're where you want to be, right? But this is what happens because a person's view of the world is changing. And the people that care for people in their own homes have that same sort of view of dementia that we do in other care environments. And so as a result, we still have that biomedical approach that doesn't accept and recognize people's changing worldview. And so what happens is your own house can become as much of an institution as any nursing home. If you don't have choice, if you don't have activities that are meaningful with the way you are and the way you are processing the world, if you don't have some choice and control over daily life, then all of a sudden you are institutionalized. And so we need to give these kinds of insights also to care partners at home, which may be family members, maybe home health services, maybe private companions, maybe friends. And there's lots of examples in my book of ways that people, even in their own home, are disempowered. And I'll just talk about Dr. Stephen Sabat, who teaches at Georgetown. He wrote a great book called The Experience of Alzheimer's Disease. And I quoted a couple of people that he interviewed. One of them was a woman he called Mrs. D and another one he called Mrs. R. And they both came to day centers, but lived with their husbands, very caring husbands. But because their husbands saw them as primarily broken, deficit-based lives that they were living, they were disempowered. They were disengaged, at home. And Dr. Sabat would interview these women and then interview their husbands in a different setting. And he thought he had the wrong people. They were so different than what he saw that he couldn't figure out what was going on. And so I'll explain these two people to you and just sort of read my summary of what he said in his pages. First about Mrs. D. At the day center she attended, Mrs. D was considered the life of the party. Born into a show business family, she was gregarious and witty, even though she had significant problems with memory, orientation, and visual spatial tasks. And her Folstein score, a 30-point cognitive score test score, was only 7 out of 30, indicating a severe level of dementia. She facilitated activities, she led sing-alongs, and she helped new members to integrate into the group. At home, however, her husband described her to be sullen and quiet, and he had assumed most of her household chores because of her dementia. Mr. D often spoke for his wife, and he would chide her whenever she made mistakes. He considered her incapable due to her disease and interpreted many of her comments as symptoms of her illness. For example, when she showed impatience in the morning because she had to, quote, go to work, her husband assumed she was delusional. Mr. D had positioned his wife as totally dependent and removed all opportunities for her to serve a useful role in the home, so she shut down. Now, when Dr. Sabat asked her directly about what did you mean when you tell your husband, hurry up, I have to go to work, she told him what she meant. And this is her own, she has difficulty with words. She's a little aphasic. I'm going to read her exact quote, but I think that with a sensitive facilitator, you can see she can express herself in a way that's very clear to you. And when I read this, you tell me if you think she's delusional. Some of them are in bad shape, you know, that they couldn't remember a thing. I would try to help them. I think it's a nice thing to do. Instead of me sitting down with the little I have, as things went by, I would work, you know, with somebody just to keep them happy. Okay? So here's where the medical blinders say you're delusional because you still think you have a job somewhere, when it's a more creative way of looking at your life. We have to think of people as being less confused and more creative. I think that's something that can help us shift. Now, Mrs. R, the other person he talked about, had a similar degree of cognitive loss, and she had a caring husband who was even more protective than Mr. D was. He would usually choose his wife's outfits, cut her food for her, and apply her makeup, even though she could do these things herself. And she told Dr. Sabat in her interview that she hated the way her husband put her makeup on. But he didn't give her the opportunity to express that to him. Her husband had assumed that she could not follow directions, so he did the chores himself. As with Mrs. D, a totally different pattern emerged, when Mrs. R was at the day center. She was interactive and helpful with a variety of chores, such as arranging chairs, showing others to the restroom, and providing comfort and consolation to people in distress. And I remind people that you can have a Folstein score of 0 out of 30, and you can still recognize the person next to you is distressed, and you can provide comfort to them. And what do we do to recognize that gift when it comes from a person with, quote, severe dementia? So we have to start thinking about what strengths people have. And when these husbands were educated to understand the potential and to re-engage, all of a sudden they could create different lives for their spouses. So very important that every living environment has the capacity to either, as Sarah Rowan, my friend, would say, either celebrate or, what's her word, or just tolerate people, or to even medicate people. Sarah Rowan is a board member of Eden Alternative. Her husband lived with dementia for many years, and she's just an amazing person, another person you need to come speak. She just lights up the room, and I can't begin to do what she does. But she talks about how once she took her husband on an outing, and his dementia was, moving along at that point. He'd lived with it for several years. And there was a little sapling that was kind of pinned by a rock, and he kind of took a knife from the picnic, and he dug it up and brought it to her and presented it to her as a gift. And he said, look, this was trapped between 2 rocks, and I set it free, and I'm giving it to you. And she said to him, oh, Joseph, what makes you the miracle you are? And as he often did, he said back to her, what makes you the miracle you are? And Sarah thought about that, and she said, what would it be like if everything we said to a person were repeated back to us? Would we feel celebrated, or would we just feel tolerated? And we have the power to celebrate people or to escalate distress, depending on how we choose our responses. So very important concepts.